Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. وأسعد الله مساء أهل الإمارات الحاضرون هنا في هذه القاعة، وتحية خاصة لأهل اليمن الحاضرون أيضا في هذه القاعة. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be with you today while the center is celebrating its 20th anniversary. After meeting Dr. Zayed today, I really remembered an ancient Japanese saying which goes like this: a vision without action is a daydream. Action without a vision is a nightmare. After meeting Dr. Zayed, I realized that at the heart of the success of this center lies the combination of a dedicated vision of Dr. Zayed and the action of his dedicated staff. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be here at this center during this festival and celebration of the center. Sorry for that. It's not working. No, there's no action. Can I use it manually instead? Yeah? Right. Today, I'm trying to highlight the interconnections or the links between space, place, and violence, using Yemen as a case study. Political geography in general is a science which concerns itself of highlighting how political geography can explain to us the links between the local, national, regional, and international levels of analysis. And this is what I will try to highlight in the case of Yemen. From a geographic perspective, deserts are not just sandy regions with little rain, and mountains are not just large landforms that stretch above the surrounding land in a form of a peak. Deserts and mountains are natural borders, physical barriers, and above all, socio-geographic dividers. Yemen provides an excellent example of how topography and geography interacts not only with history and human behavior, but also with sect, mode of production, politics, and power. And that's what I will try to illustrate today. Say Yemen, and especially in the Western mindset, and immediately the image of tribal Yemen. However, this image is a static image. It's an ethnocentric, static, one-dimensional image of Yemen. To begin with, Yemen is not a tribal society, as it is circulated in international media outlets. To give you an example, the number of electoral constituencies in Al-Hudaydah, which is a province along the Red Sea, non-tribal province, is 34, which is much more than the combined number of electoral constituencies in Ma'rib, Al-Jawf, Amran, and Sa'da, the most tribal provinces in the country. The total number of tribal population in Yemen does not exceed 20 to 25% of the population. Still, according to the international media outlets, Yemen is a tribal society, which is not the reality on the ground. Going back, I'll be moving back to history, which helps us. Yemen was known as Felix, or Arabia Felix, by the ancient Greeks, simply because it was a spot which receives the monsoons twice a year. There are heavy rain, which made the spot looks greener than the rest of the region. And so the Greeks named it the Happy Arabia. Yemen is one of the core foundations, actually, of civilizations in the Middle East. As a result, of its distinguished green color compared to the neighboring parts. If the Nile is the gift of Egypt, if Egypt is the gift of the Nile, Yemen is the gift of the monsoons. It was a very prosperous country. Once upon a time, there were many kingdoms controlling the incense. Historians estimate about 3,500 tons of incense being exported from Yemen all the way up to Greece and Rome. There was actually a vast network, vast commercial network connecting the southern part of Arabia, which is Yemen, with the Horn of Africa and Southeast Asia, and all the way to Europe. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, Yemenis were among the earliest converters to Islam. Actually, many of the front soldiers in the Islamic army were Yemenis. This was in the 7th century. And then, at the time, as we know, the Umayyad dynasty lasted until 750, from 661 to 750. Then the Abbasid Caliphate from 750 to 1258. And during that time, Yemen experienced an offshoot, actually the offshoot of Shiism, which is called Zaydism, appeared in the 9th century in Yemen. Being far away from the center of the Abbasid Caliphate allowed a sect to emerge known as the Zaydi sect. Zaydi sect, as we will see on the map, was mainly dominated in the northern highlands of the country. Here we are, having what I just mentioned a while ago, the interaction between mountains and sect. Zaydism came to Yemen by Al-Hadi ila al-Haq, Yahya ibn al-Husayn, ibn al-Qasim al-Rassi, ibn Ismail, ibn Ibrahim, ibn Ali, ibn Abi Talib. He was called to Yemen by some tribes, Bani Khawlan, to resolve a conflict among tribes. He did manage to solve the conflict, and he settled, and Zaydism, an offshoot of Shiism, was born in the northern highlands of Yemen. Yemen, again, historically, became known because of its coffee trade. Mocha, we all use the term Mocha coffee, is originating from Yemen. It's a city in Yemen called Mocha. As a result of the coffee, there was a competition among the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the British, and the Ottomans later to have a monopoly over the coffee trade. Now, looking again at this satellite image, we realize that up there in the north, we have Zaydi Shiites, and along the coast, by the way, the coast from Midi, which is northwestern part of Yemen, to Hof in the southeast, is more than 2,000 kilometers of coast. So the Sunni Shafi'i are concentrated along the coast, part of the central, and then the southern part, while Zaydi Shiites on the northern highlands. Here we are, we have the interaction between geography and sect, the concentration of sects in particular geographical areas. Prior to the uprisings, inspired by the so-called Arab Spring, the map of Yemen was fissured with conflicts and violence, mainly three main pockets of violence. In the northern part, the so-called Houthi rebellion, and then we have in the eastern and some southern provinces active presence of transnational militant jihadists, including Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And then we have many inter-tribal disputes. The number of the population, number of people killed as a result of disputes over water and land per year is between 4,000 to 5,000 persons, which is much more than the number of victims of Al-Qaeda, for example. And then we have the southern movement, the secessionist movement in the south, and we will go through the reasons behind each of these pockets of unrest. If you travel outside the capital city, Sana'a, you will come across these fortified settlements. Yemen is divided into 21 provinces, subdivided into 334 districts, subdivided into 2,850 sub-districts, subdivided into 38,560 villages, and more than 130,000 settlements as small communities, scattered, built on mountain tops, cliffs. And if you go into any of these small settlements, you find 99.9% of the people are relatives there. The population is dispersed, fragmented, which is make it so difficult for a central government to control. Again, correlation between geography, politics, and power. As you see, just to make you enjoy a bit some of these magnificent photos, Yemen, by the way, is a paradise for anthropologists of the Middle East. There is no place in the region which can provide the most local of the local than Yemen. Many communities outside the urban centers still have what the anthropologists are hungry for: ethnicity. Sleepy villages, small communities. This is Wadi Du'an in Hadramaut, impressive. We always hear about the fear of Yemen being turned into Somalia or Afghanistan of the Middle East. There was lots of talk about the so-called Afghanization of Yemen, Somalization of Yemen, Balkanization of Yemen. From a political science perspective, states are classified into strong, weak, fragile, collapsing, and collapsed. Yemen, for decades, has been a fragile state. Yemen is one of the entities which has been experiencing one of the worst political realities, namely neither falling nor stabilizing. Again, you go to many of these small villages, you could see these towers, and sometimes in some of the northern tribal areas, they position their machine guns at night. Yemen taught me that if there is a shopping list which the state should provide, I think there is nothing as crucial as the provision of security. Everywhere I have been in these northern small communities, the word security was appearing before my eyes. And that's mainly due to the weakness of the central authority. Throughout history, throughout modern history of Yemen, the periphery has been disconnected or very weakly linked with the center. Another fact, which also will help us understanding the relationship between pockets of conflict and rest and geography, is Yemen is one of the least urbanized entities in the region. The urbanization rate is between 30 to 35%. More than 70% of the population live in rural and tribal areas. The majority of the population in Yemen live in the periphery, and have always wondered why Yemen did not collapse. Why was it possible? Why it happened in places like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Haiti, Somalia, Afghanistan? Another lesson I learned from Yemen is that the periphery in Yemen actually prevented the state collapse. Meaning, in most of the cases of state failure or state collapse, violence starts from the periphery and warlords start attacking the center and a civil war is initiated. The presence of tribal population outside the center maintained the existence of the state. They somehow filled the power vacuum by providing a safety net to the population, social services, and security. So this is one of the advantages I've always noticed when I attempt to understand state-tribe relations in Yemen. Tribes in Yemen played a major role in preventing the collapse of the center. Yemen is distinguished by its ancient traditions, ancient culture. It was, for anthropologists, an exotic Middle Eastern other, colorful, authentic, until suddenly Yemen has become known in the international media outlets not as a place that exports exotic, colorful, authentic image of the Middle East, but as a transportation of terrorism. The story began, we had on October 12, 2000, the USS Cole, 16 or 17 US sailors were killed. Then an attack on October 6, 2002 on the French Limburg oil tank. And then we had an attack on September 17, 2008 on the US Embassy in Sana'a. And then we had the Fort Hood shooting, in which Nader, an officer, was inspired, we were told, had links with al-Awlaki, who used to be known as the Bin Laden of the internet, and that he recruited him to shoot his US soldiers' colleagues at Fort Hood. Then the famous Christmas plot and the Nigerian student and the underwear plot in December 25th, 2009. Then we heard about, in 2010, about the attempt of sending explosives in inkjets, destination US. So every now and then we get glimpses that Yemen is becoming a breeding site for transnational militant jihadism. The link, of course, with militant jihadists in Yemen is closely associated with the Afghanistan war from 79 to 88. Many hundreds, maybe, or thousands of Yemenis went for the jihad in Afghanistan during that period. Some of them returned back, and it was easy to recruit them. Let's have a look at the context. Looking at the map here, this is the map which shows the least developed countries. It's a list by the UN. There are about 49. 35 of them are in Africa. We have one in the Caribbean, the rest in Asia, and Yemen is being perceived as one of the LDCs. And I always wonder, how does it feel to be an LDC in the neighborhood of oil monarchies? It must be too harsh to be a least developed republic in the neighborhood of wealthy monarchies. Let us keep this image in mind. Suffering from many shortages, one of them is water, and there are some reports highlighting that Sana'a might be the first capital on earth to run out of water. Weapons and arms are infested in the country, especially in tribal areas. There are exaggerated figures of 60 million, which is too exaggerated, but definitely having an AK-47 is something like a part of the dress of a tribeman. We have a problem of youth. We have more than about 70 to 71% of the population are below the age of 25. Unemployment is high. What we have, I'm sorry, I'm running with the slides because of the time, we can talk later. All the aspects of human security are very clear in the case of Yemen, and they are all interlinked together. Again, quick history. Ottomans came to Yemen twice. The first expedition in the 16th century, and the second expedition from 1849 to 1918. They came, actually, they were concerned about the passage to the holy city of Mecca. They were concerned about the presence of Portuguese in the area. The first expedition was very harsh for them. They were furiously resisted by the tribal population. And again, in the second expedition, the Ottomans had a very rough time in Yemen. Yemen has been always the Vietnam, the graveyard for any invader. It's one of the very few entities in the world which escaped the colonial project. 3 countries in the world escaped the colonial project: Yemen, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia. These are the only 3 entities that managed to escape colonial project. But the presence of Ottomans was mainly along the coast, southern provinces, and part of the center. They didn't manage to have presence up in the northern area, the Zayed mountainous area, which we show before. 1 hour drive from Sana'a, there is Kawkaban, beautiful escapement, impressive landscape. The locals, they call this valley Maqbaratul Atrak, the graveyard of the Turks. Many Turkish troops were slaughtered in this part during the 19th century. Yemen passed through an imamate system. Imam Yahya, which announced the independence of Yemen in 1918. And then from 1918 until 1948, he was assassinated. In 1948, he was followed by his son, Imam Ahmad, who remained until 1962, and then his son, Imam al-Badr, who remained in power for just 1 week, and a civil war started 1 week after being in office. The September 1962 revolution took place. Yemen was a theocratic, encapsulated or isolated imamate system. Some military officers inspired by Pan-Arabism and Nasserism in 1960s, they toppled the imamate system, and as I mentioned, a long civil war was initiated between the Republican part and the monarchist part. Egyptian military was heavily involved. The first president is Abdullah al-Sallal from 1962 until 1967, inspired by Nasserism, presence of Egyptian troops. The attempt, this is one of the stamps which shows how naive the Egyptian administration at the time tried to duplicate a hydraulic model of socialist Pan-Arab Egypt in the 60s in Yemen. Imam al-Badr mobilized tribes from Hajjah and in the northern parts, and as I mentioned, long war was initiated. The memoirs of one of the Egyptian generals, Kamal Hassan Ali, he said, "We committed a mistake. We focus on cities and towns, and we forgot that power centers in Yemen are fragmented and dispersed." Yemen is really distinguished, that power was not concentrated at the center, but fragmented. There are so many pockets of power in Yemen. In the south, it was a very different story. In 1839, the British East India Company took Aden because of its strategic location, and it became a crown colony in 1937. It was managed from Bombay in the beginning, and then later from London. In Aden, there are some evidence of the Victorian architecture of the British colonial project at the time. Later, we had in the south the proposal which turned into a federation of protectorates. My apology if I'm running because of time, we can talk later. Then the anti-colonial struggle started in the south. Leave you with these rare photos from the time of the anti-colonial resistance from 1963 to 1967. And then in November 1967, British left the south of Yemen. So what we have at the time, we have a northern republic with heavy concentration of tribal population in the north, and then we have Zaydi tribal population, and then we have a southern entity which has been always exposed to the outside world. Not only because of the British. The diaspora from Hadramaut and from the southern provinces have reached all the way to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, to the extent that the ex-Minister of Foreign Affairs, Al-Attas, in Indonesia, was originally from Yemen. They were in key positions. They were successful merchants. Why I'm mentioning this? To highlight how geography, when you are positioned along the coast, you have a higher possibility of interaction with the outside world than to be isolated up on high mountains. In the south, the Marxist system was established until the fall of the wall in Berlin, and then as a result, the former South and the former North united together in 22nd of May 1990. And this has become the amalgamation of the flag. Some scholars describe it cynically speaking. One of the scholars said, one poor country united with another poor country to become one poorer country. And another cynical scholar said, it's a unification between Afghanistan and East Germany. These are arguable statements being released every now and then by some scholars. Unfortunately, due to the clash of different political cultures, due to the clash of different political history, value system, tension was there between the former North and former South, which ended in 1994 by North-South War and the Northern victory and entering Aden in July 1994. I want you to have a look at this. These are the photos of all presidents which governed Yemen in the modern political history. Up there are the leaders of the northern Yemen. Abdullah Salal from 1962 until 1967, he ended up in Baghdad, exiled until he died as a result of a coup. Al-Aryani from 1967 to 1974, he was exiled in Damascus. Al-Hamdi from 1974 to 1977, assassinated. Al-Ghashmi from 1977 to 1978, assassinated. Let us leave Mr. Saleh for the time being. Then we look at the south. Al-Shabi, he was house arrest, imprisoned, and died later. Al-Salimain assassinated. Ismail assassinated. Nasser was exiled in Damascus. Al-Bayed was exiled in Oman and then to Europe and currently in Beirut. Climbing the political arena in Yemen either leads to exile or to assassination, except for Mr. Saleh. He managed to govern Yemen for more than 3 decades. And that's a big question mark. How did he manage to stay in such a violent political arena, very unstable, for more than 3 decades? A number of reasons can be suggested. One of them, he said, governing Yemen is like dancing on the heads of snakes. You have to be always cautious with every step, every movement. Former President Saleh, actually, when he dealt with the tribes, for example, which is one of the main sources of instability, he knew how to deal with them. He didn't govern them, he managed them. Introduced tools of survival, which was at the heart of his politics of survival. And politics of survival is also at the heart of tribal politics. Tribes are not as rigid as we always imagine. Tribes are very flexible and amazingly very pragmatic. They can change alliances and coalitions. They are not actually somehow attracted to ideologies, they are attracted more to survival. Ideology does not count that much, but survival counts in the tribal setup. And Saleh knew the game of survival. This is how state-society relations looked like. We had a fragile or a weak state. Some scholars describe it as an arrested state. It's arrested. It can't impose its will. And it has all the features of state weakness, but this very same state was supposedly governing a society which is fragmented, geographically dispersed, and heavily armed society. This is a map I borrowed from Paul Dresch in Oxford, which shows the major tribes of Yemen. There is more than 160 to 180 tribes in Yemen. There are 3 major tribal confederations. By the way, the tribal structure is made of concentric circles. So you have the nuclear family, extended family, and then you have a sub-tribe or clan, which is made of 4 to 6 extended families. And then the clans are turned into tribes, which is 5 to 7 clans. And the tribes can be confederation by 2, 3, 4 tribes. So confederation is the most outer, and the inner one is the nuclear and extended family. We have three major tribal confederations in Yemen currently: Hashid, Bakil, and Midhij. Although Bakil is larger than Hashid, Hashid is politically more influential than Bakil. The significance of these tribes, you can see that they are very close to Sana'a. This tribal confederation looks like there is a ring around Sana'a by these tribal confederations. So they are very close to the center of power. They can influence and shape, and they did so. They have played a major role. Looking at the administrative borders of the 21 governorates, one can find out, for example, in certain provinces in the north, the districts are classified according to clans and to families. So the modern system has been adopted to the tribal system. According to the orthodox political modernization theory, there are three main agents. You take them anywhere and you can modernize any entity: military, state institutions, and political parties. If you have these three agents, you parachute them in any entity on the world and you modernize this entity. Why? In the military, the salute and the respect is to the high rank. It demolishes the subnational affiliation. It's not about a family, it's not about a tribe, it's about equal wearing the same uniform and respect to the hierarchy. And it's also military, the army, is the largest factory of nationalism. The best factory for creating nationalism is the military. If you have state institutions in the form of bureaucracy, it will deal with me, with X and Y as citizens, not because I am a member of a particular tribe, not because he is a member of a particular clan. So state institutions. And then political parties. Political parties, people join political parties because of the ideology of the political parties, not because of family and tribal affiliation. What happened in Yemen is very unique in this respect. All modernizing agents have been tribalized. The military has been tribalized, state institutions has been tribalized, and political parties have been tribalized. It's the other way around. One of the unique cases in which forces of political modernization have been tribalized, the other way around. So districts are classified according to clans and tribes, and tribal leaders in the northern and eastern parts have so much power to the extent some of them have their own private jails and prisons. This is one of the sessions for conflict dispute. And here comes the positive side of tribal system. The overwhelming majority of disputes and conflicts in many parts of Yemen are resolved through mediation, through tribal conflict, traditional methods, which reduce the burden on the state. The court justice system will take ages to materialize. So tribes, as I mentioned, played a major role in maintaining the central authority. Some influential tribal families like Al-Ahmar, in the middle, the late Sheikh Abdullah, who died in December 2007, was the most influential tribal figure in Yemen, and he was a balancing force. At his time, they used to say Sheikh Abdullah is Sheikh al-Ra'is wa Ra'is al-Sheikh, the Sheikh of the President and the President of the Sheikh, the relationship between former President Saleh and the late Sheikh Abdullah al-Ahmar. His sons have had some political ambitions, but the point here is that tribes somehow during the last decades became a part of the central nervous system of politics in Yemen. Again, to this interesting map, if you remember, we were watching how up there were Zaydi Shiites and here Sunni Shafi'is. As a result of political history, two different political histories, the tribal areas have been always interacting with the state as allies. And that was the system long before the 1962 revolution. The relationship with the central authority as allies. They can be involved every now and then. But along the coast and the southern provinces, central parts, there is a tradition of feeling subjects, citizen-center relations. How's the time? Okay. Quickly, some pockets of violence. One of them, as we mentioned earlier, is the Houthi rebellion. 6 rounds of military confrontation between the Houthi rebellions along the northern provinces with the central authority between 2004 to 2010. And in the 5th round, the Saudi military even interfered. As a result of the Shiite rebellion along the borders, there are lots of destruction, massive destruction as a result of these military confrontations. There is a large number of IDPs, internally displaced persons, in the hundreds of thousands in the northern provinces. And then we have the second source of instability, the demand, the call for secession in the southern provinces. Some of my friends in the south, they prefer to use disengagement rather than secession. But somehow they felt marginalized after the 1994, and then they started from 2007 to protest and to make their grievances heard. There are some arguments that actually the Arab Spring started in 2007 in the southern provinces of Yemen. Nostalgia to the former southern system, the form of a flag, because they felt at the time of the socialist system, they were treated as citizens. There is a strong feeling of citizenship in the southern provinces compared to the northern provinces. Another major source of conflict is Al-Qaeda, or transnational militant jihadism. And Bin Laden made a statement which is reflective. He said the geography of Yemen is mountainous and its people are armed tribes people. It allows one to breathe clean air without humiliation. One of his statements in the 90s. And he actually called many militant jihadists to go to Yemen as a shelter. The family of Bin Laden, as we all know,
كما نعرف أن عائلة بن لادن فوالده مولود في اليمن وهذا منزله الذي ولد فيه والده، وكنتيجة لنجاح العمل المضاد لهؤلاء الجهاديين
core policies, and it was led by Prince Mohammed bin Naif. As a result of the successful Saudi campaign, many of these militant jihadists escape to Yemen along the border. Here comes again geography, the proximity to a successful counter-terrorism campaign. In 2009, Al-Qaeda in Yemen merged with Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia, those who fled the successful Saudi campaign, and established Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qaeda fi Shibh Jazirat al-Arab, led by Al-Wahishi, who is a Yemeni actually, who used to be in Afghanistan. One of the most interesting people I love to talk with in Yemen are old Yemenis sitting in the allays of old Sana'a. Whenever I feel paralyzed, unable to figure out what's happening in the political arena, I always go and sit with people in their 70s and 80s, seeking their advice and their explanations. And believe me, they have better explanations than encyclopedias. I always look at them and try to wonder how much they have seen in 5 decades. Only in 5 decades in the history of a country. They had an isolated Zayed imamate. They had a British crown colony. They have dozens of sultanates. They had a federation. They had civil war. They had external military intervention, Egyptian forces and Saudis in the 60s. They had a northern conservative republic, southern Marxist republic, dozens of political assassination, multiple border wars, then they unified together the tribal and the Marxist, then a North-South war, then insurgency, 6 military confrontation, then secession, then the fear of terrorism and transnational militant jihadism, and inter-tribal wars. I bet if there is any political entity in this world who can really manage to survive all these political shocks in such a short period of time. And Yemen taught me about the amazing power of resilience. The Yemeni people are among one of the most resilient societies. They can remain intact despite all political shocks. And this is an advantage that we need always to think about. What I just shared with you was trying to highlight the local and the national levels. Going regionally, looking at Yemen entity, and I'm sorry, Qatar is not here, not intentionally, I swear, it's just the map. Oh. So the entity, Yemen as an entity, surrounded by prosperous, wealthy oil monarchies, very stable, while the entity here has been always experiencing political shocks. The uprisings inspired the Arab Spring, and then we found how the role of the army was essential, crucial in shaping the context and consequences of the uprisings. The Yemen military became divided, as you know. Part of the military was pro the protesters, part of the military remained loyal to the regime. We have a huge problem as a result of the Arab Spring, the winds of the Arab Spring in Yemen. We have a problem of tribal militias, flourishing of armed non-state actors as a result of the power vacuum. In the case of Yemen, in the rest of the region, the fear was about whether autocracy will be replaced by theocracy or democracy. But in the case of Yemen, there was so much fear that it will turn into anarchy. Taking into consideration the strategic geographic location of Yemen at the intersection of the Red Sea with the Indian Ocean, there are more than 22,000 merchant vessels pass every year from the Gulf of Aden. There are more than 3.3 million barrels of oil pass through Bab el-Mandeb every day. So it's a very, very strategic geographical location. The distance here between the Yemeni side of Bab el-Mandeb and the Djibouti side is just 30 kilometers. The Washington was mainly concerned about the power vacuum will result in the flourishing of Al-Qaeda. So as you have been hearing, they are conducting drones every now and then since the uprising, which escalated. The GCC stepped in to find a peaceful solution. And this is one of the successful stories of the GCC. It was actually looking at all the cases of the Arab Spring. Yemen is the only case in which a settlement was found, a peaceful settlement was found. Another major factor, the United Arab Emirates played a major role, but the United Arab Emirates foreign policy is not about showing off. It does a lot without showing off, taking into consideration a balanced foreign policy committed to dialogue and resolving disputes through peaceful means. So, we saw how the interactions between the national, local, national, regional, and international levels of analysis, which can explain to us the situation in Yemen. A national dialogue was initiated, 565 participants, representing all social groups of the country. They were debating in dialogue for more than 10 months. They have reached to many proposals. There is drafting of the constitution, and there is a proposal of a federal system, as you heard, and there is a proposal of 6 regions, dividing Yemen as an attempt of diffusing the tension. They proposed dividing Yemen into 6 regions, and this is still disputable. Some elements, particularly Al-Houthis, who are called Ansarullah for the time being, they are not happy of having a region there which doesn't have an access to the Red Sea. We need to take into consideration that we are dealing with a fragile political entity located in a very strategic location. And I would love to hear questions from you to talk about it. What to do? What to do to a place which contributed so much to the civilization, culture, and history of this region, which is currently facing waves of crisis and on the verge of collapse with so much consequences on regional and international security. Some suggest that Yemen should join the GCC. And there was lots of conversations for the last years about how can we integrate Yemen within the GCC, which is one of the most stable entities in the region. There are proposals, for example, why not to start by linking Yemen through railway networks just to integrate it further. And I would love to hear from you, how can we help saving Yemen from collapse with all the consequences of regional and international insecurity? I thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.
We thank Dr. Khaled for this valuable lecture in which you spoke about many points and issues related to Yemen and the effects of the geography of Yemen and the many crises and the issues that confront Yemen. And you have posed a question and you left it on how to deal with the Yemeni crisis and whether to integrate Yemen as a part of the GCC or whether there are other proposals. Now we give the opportunity for questions. Dr. Abdul Razak, welcome. And we start with a question from Dr. Abdul Rida. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. هل تفهم العربية?
In English.
Yes, my apology on behalf of the international
community. Should have been in mother tongue and we did understand better.
Inshallah.
Since you talked in English, I might communicate with you. I enjoy seeing you enjoy your presentation.
Thank you so much.
But prior to that, I'm in a position to say مبروك. المركز الإمارات, they've reached the 400 level, so you are way up. مبروكين. I'm happy to really to see the pictures that you've shown, and I remember seeing Yemen, so it's a nice place and nostalgic, but it's there is so many controversies and so many contradictions. We went to school about half a century ago, and Yemen was called Al-Yemen al-Sa'id. Now our children go to school, and they hear that Al-Yemen al-Sa'id became Al-Yemen Ta'is. Have changed everything. What had happened in the 50 years ago? As a political science, yourself and myself, we always look at a state building and a nation building. Do you think Yemen succeeded or failed in both state building and nation building? And, you know, referring to your central nervous system of Yemen, you think there is a central nervous system in Yemen? Is it functional or it's better dysfunctional? And lastly, but not the least, in answer to your question, would Yemen qualify to become a member of GCC? I'll tell you one thing. If Yemen had continued with its imamate, المملكة المتوكلية اليمنية, the answer would have been more benign. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I have two questions, but to start with both questions, with all political, social, economic developments in Yemen, which you have just displayed, and the conflict between South and North, Sunnis and Shias, and the ambitions of Yemen to become also a full member of the GCC. The first question, what can the central government do to preserve the unity of Yemen? The second one, how can Yemen effectively deal with external influence from countries such Iran?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
بناخذ الجهة الثانية. لحظة شوي بس الأخ نعم كان توقف بس الله يخليك.
أنا؟
إيه نعم. تعطينا اسمك.
السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله.
محمد طنيجي.
مرحبا.
دكتور، أول شيء حبيت أشكرك على
First to thank you for the beautiful lecture on Yemen. You started your lecture by saying that Yemen was not a tribal country. But, and through your lecture and the excellent lecture you presented, you showed us how Yemen was tribalized when the government wanted to develop Yemen through the three components. It was tribalized. So,
شكرا.
you explain this point to us? Please always introduce yourself prior to asking your questions. Good evening. I don't know much in politics, but what I know is that the problem in Yemen since it started democracy in the north, there was the Mutawakkili kingdom, and Imam Ahmad was most prominent sheikhs of Yemen who would send a stone with a soldier, and the dispute would be solved. Once upon a time, one of the tribes of Murad, which are very fierce tribes, one of them took part in assassinating Imam Yahya. He brought them chained, and he said they should not be brought to him unless they were chained. So if there is a powerful rule that was in the north, they would succeed. In the south, there was the colonization, and there were no problems, and the Communist Party achieved security. So the problem that I think Yemen requires and needs a powerful state. But if the situation continues as such, Yemen would become another Afghanistan. And what I demand from the GCC countries is that Yemen is their neighbor, and it is known that it is a country that produces these problems. I call on them to stabilize a powerful state in Yemen if they want peace. And otherwise, terrorism would spread from Yemen not only to the Arab Peninsula, but to all the Arab countries. Thank you. I thank you all for your questions. Let us start with
immediate. خليها بالعربي ولا بالعربي. Okay. So please forgive me, English-speaking audience. I will shift to Arabic now, and then you will receive translation, hopefully.
In regard of the state building and the nation building, you find that Yemen has known the state more than all other states. In the history, there were states and central authorities, but there was weakness, clear weakness in the northern mountainous region. Sometimes I think that the idea of the state itself was still in some of the minds of the people in of the north. The idea of the monopoly with the state controlling all elements, we do not find it in the north. What happened in the state building was the failure of the modernization. Sometimes I think that we deal cruelly with Yemen. If we look at any other state in the area and how Yemen started, it is political life with so many wars and horrible wars and political interests and regional interests which manipulated the Yemeni scene. Yemen has not given the opportunity to build itself, and I feel sometimes that Yemen has fallen in a group of interests of other countries. What I know, Yemenis are the most that do not suffer from a problem of identity, because they have thousands of history and civilization and belonging to their land. And according to my information, there was no need to build a state. If we look at Prophet Muhammad's hadith, Yemen was mentioned for 1,000 years, and one of the few countries mentioned during the Prophet's time was Yemen. There was the feeling of the Yemeni society. The problem was of the state building. A crack took place in the concept of the state, and we always confuse between what happened in the north and the south. What in regard of Yemen, we deal with two political histories. The building of the state succeeded in the south more than it happened in the north due to the power of the center. And as stated by my colleague, we are in need of strengthening the center in Yemen to start again building the center. I hope I have answered your question, and I am ready to meet with you after the end of the lecture. In regard of how Yemen can conserve its unity, this is one of the major problems facing Yemen, how to safeguard the united Yemen. There are serious attempts by the GCC, who is exerting efforts. The United Nations is available there and is trying. If we look at the political reality, it is better than 2 months ago. There is an interest on the political unity, and the proposal for 6 regions was an attempt to stop Yemen from being divided. But the Arab Spring, it is unfortunate that the Arab Spring is a secessionist. But how to protect Yemen from fragmenting? We can look at the history of Europe and how the United States interfered with the Marsh Plan. Yemen is in need at present. If there is a powerful GCC presence in Yemen, that would help to protect Yemen from Iran, because Yemen is a fragile state. 2,000 kilometers of coast can allow Iran to interfere easily in Yemen. I try to show you that we are in need to protect and to safeguard the Yemeni state. As in regard of the tribe, the photos could have given an impression of the tribes, but as I said, the tribal population amounts to 20 to 25% only. As for in the class in the middle of Yemen and the south, it is civilized, and it is not powerful demographically, but it is politically powerful. They managed for centuries, for the last 4 centuries, they managed to infiltrate into the Yemeni political kitchen, and I repeat again, those who try to look negatively to the tribes miss a lot. I learned in the tribe, for example, I used to visit the tribes in the north of Yemen and other areas, and I used to find that they solve their problems so easily through cooperation and collaboration, and they stand together, and this provide the emotional and the social protection. They have noble traditions and habits, and in order for the center to clarify the role and the positive role of the tribe, it's important I call you that the markets in the tribal areas are sacred areas where no fighting can be fought, and when a crime happens in the market would be closed immediately, and it would be shifted kilometers away as a punishment for that crime that was allowed to happen. So there are values and traditions in the tribes. I am against those who think that the tribe is always the origin of troubles. So the tribes, the tribal population is 20 to 25% of the population, but they are powerful. And what I mean, the nervous system, I mean the political system of Yemen. And the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh was speaking with some friends. He was asked who is closer to him, the military or the tribe. He said the military. I can be dismissed from the military, but as a tribe I have the continuous membership.
يتعلق باليمن ومجلس التعاون الخليجي. أعتقد أن
the Yemen and the GCC countries, as I said in the beginning, you were right when you said that if Yemen became a shelter for jihadists, it will be a nightmare in terms of security for the GCC countries. There should be coordination in efforts, and the Saudi experience was very successful in this context because it was a combination of all these components. This was a rehabilitation program. We have to make a package with the help of GCC countries in Yemen in order to fight terrorism. Usually jihadists spread in Yemen among the youth who are jobless. A large percentage are being brainwashed by the jihadists. So we have to treat the economic aspects in order to tackle the security aspect. Now I will open the floor to a second batch of questions. I will take questions from the back. Let's listen to the guy from the back side. But please introduce yourself. Peace be upon you. Saad al-Din from a Geographic company. Regarding the presentation, it was so suspenseful because it tackled different issues and it was rich in information, but what was not taken into consideration is the economic aspect. And I think that the main cause of all violence in Yemen is threefold. The incubator is al-qat, this drug, which is a result of poverty and ignorance. If we manage to fight this, we will establish an entity which is stronger. Where Abdel Fattah Ismail was the president of Yemen. Can you remind me, please? Thank you. I hope that the people who ask questions give direct questions in order to enable others to ask their questions. Peace be upon you, Dr. Ahmed. I'm a journalist. I thank very much the Emirate Center for Strategic Studies and Research for this rich presentations. And I thank the presenter. I heard the scientific talk about the history, the past of Yemen. I was expecting the presentation to be about the present and the future, but he raised the question about the solution to the Yemen. I think that the great Yemen and the happy Yemen, the solution was to sign the Gulf document. So I am with the opinion which says that Yemen should remain the incubator of the Gulf region. Please be brief in your questions. Peace be upon you, Mohammed Hassan. Special thanks to the Emirate Center for Strategic Studies and Research, and special thanks as well to Dr. Khaled. The first question is with regard to the economic situation in Yemen. Does it affect the recruitment of jihadists to other members? And the second question is the plant of CAT. Does it have any role in joining of Yemen to the GCC countries? Stand up, please, and in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Dr. Fawzi Hassan. I'm from Research Center. Dr. Khaled, your presentation was very attractive, but I would like to tell you that the crisis in Yemen, the real crisis, is the education, the political education of the Yemeni individuals, because throughout several decades, what happened is loyalties to tribes and the loyalty to leaders at the extent of the nation, the country. So the failure of Yemen in these things, in tackling these problems, has aggravated the situation. The Gulf countries are excused because we have the Houthi rebellion, which had confrontations with the Saudi government, the Saudi military. How can GCC countries help the Yemen? And it is in this very bad situation. Peace be upon you, Abdallah Al-Atibi. We as Arabs, we always think of solving the problem when it happens already. But we have to change our approach and to be more proactive. Now there is Al-Qaeda in the south. Why the Al-Qaeda presence was not in the south, and why it emerges and it disappears as if there are some officials in the country who control this. And you can take the example of coal destroyer. I will take 3 more questions and we'll finish. In the beginning, I would like to thank Dr. Khaled. Please introduce yourself. Dr. Al-Afifi, retired officer. I would like to tell Dr. Khaled in a nutshell that it's not true that 25% of Yemenis are from tribes, because in Yemen, who is not a tribal is not Yemeni, and the rest are Persians and from other origins. If you want to diagnose any situation, you have to diagnose it correctly. When the Prophet said, may Yemen be blessed and the Levant are part of the Mecca, Yemen did not emerge only, emerged only during Mutawakkilite kingdom. Everyone has to know that the country which was in the south is an example for us, and we think that if there is no law enforced, and what I would like to tell you, doctor, is that as one of the colleagues said, the issue of Qaeda and violence in south, and that is exported from the north. If Yemen joins the GCC, it will be a disaster, and you dramatize the situation, but and you magnify the greatness of Yemen. Yemen is constituting 75% of the tribes in Yemen, and till the British colonization, we think that if Yemen wants to become stabilized, the states of South Yemen should regain its force, and Yemenis are ready to give big parts of their revenues to their brothers in in the north. So I hope that we don't dramatize the situation more or magnify the greatness of Yemen. Now we take further 3 questions, and I apologize to the others, but please give me some question from ladies. If you can stand up, please. The lady who is raising her hand. Peace be upon you, Musa. Dr. Khaled, do you think that the neighboring countries should establish a party which is anti-Houthi, or will this be considered as an external intervention? And will the Yemeni borders will be respected? We take 2 questions now. Dr. Ali Al-Amoudi. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Thank you, Dr. Khaled Fattah. Dr. Khaled, when we look at the values of some people which have civilization and history and culture, we have to be objective. Unfortunately, some people intervened sarcastically. Some people said Yemen was happy and now it is sad. Well, history is history, and may Allah bless Sheikh Zayed, the late Sheikh Zayed, who said who is not from Yemen, is not an Arab, and history is telling us about this. The Arab tribes, when they migrate in different parts in the Arabian Peninsula and they reached North Africa and the Levant, we have to respect the history of Yemen. We cannot cover the sun. I thank you, Dr. Khaled, for your approach. In the past, we didn't know anything that has to do with violence. There were tribes, and the biggest evidence is that the revolution, which were led by the youth, there was no use of violence. Knowing that most of Yemenis are armed and have weapons in their houses. But the history tells us that the future generations will know the realities of their ancestors in the Gulf. Where was Aden and Yemen in the past? Aden was London of its time in the past, and it has a great potential in the region. So now we have to look at the history objectively and to look at the circumstances of the Yemen in a positive way. And we think GCC countries. My question is, Dr. Khaled, you know that, and because I'm specialist in sustainable development and environment, we have great fortunes in Yemen. We can do without the help of Europe, thanks to the waters we have, and you know that the wars of the future will be on water. And we have rivers of water, we have natural resources, a lot of them, we have tourism, we have a lot of fish. So if there is a complementarity in economy and in tourism between Yemen and the GCC countries, we will do without the allies. And you know that a lot of cards are being played in Yemen. The political violence, which is something intruder to the Yemen, I think that reality is here, and the history is documenting these realities. I urge you please to be brief in your questions. Peace be upon you. Jamil Muhammad. الكثير من
is taking place, but all of this discussion is in a vacuum. When we refer and look at the West, we find that the state is built, the nation is built based upon certain values, beliefs, philosophies which are deep-rooted within the nation. Unfortunately, what has happened is that what is being forced within Yemen are elite who are mesmerized by secular liberalism and trying to impose these foreign values which are contrary to the beliefs and values of the people. As such, I would say that at best we can describe these Arab liberalists as just being good translators, because they haven't contributed to these ideas. It does not come from their beliefs and values and history there. So I believe that when you go back to your beliefs and values and produce something that the people respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا. وانا اعتذر عن البقيه اعتذار حار لان الا اذا في عنصر نسائي. العنصر النسائي اعطيه لان فعلا في وحده سالته لازم نعطيه. في وحده تبغى تسال بس كانت توقفين بس هي تكون اخر سؤال. لو بس توقفين لو سمحتي.
السلام عليكم. السؤال هو ما هي التأثيرات والتدخلات الخارجية التي تغذي العنف في اليمن؟ وشكرا.
شكرا.
تفضل.
Okay, all right. I will answer the questions which were posed in Arabic, then I will answer you, the gentleman in English. أتفق كل الاتفاق مع الإخوة الذين ذكروا أن عامل الفقر أو الجهل كما ذكر الأخ كريم أحد العوامل الأساسية في
I agree with the people who say that poverty and ignorance are factors which really aggravated the situation in Yemen. There are people who talked about ideological violence, but some circumstances, especially among the youth in some particular areas, make them become human bombs. When they become desperate, when they don't find a state that is consolidated which can fulfill his and her requirements and needs. It doesn't mean that the Yemeni mentality is radical, but I would like to tell you that Yemen is one of the most tolerant nations in the world and in the region. We never had a problem with the sky, with the heaven. We always accepted other doctrines and religions. What is happening currently in terms of ideological violence is something that is very recent because of the economic situations and some regional changes, as I mentioned during the Afghan war and the Soviet presence there. A lot of youth from Yemen go to Afghanistan as jihadists, and when they came back they didn't find any recruiter who can rehabilitate them, and then they became really human bombs. According to my knowledge, there are people, there are youth who suffer, and we have to look at their suffering before tackling the problem of ideological violence. Let's go back to the people who talked about history of Yemen. Yemen has different histories. It's why I accept different approaches in the history of Yemen. There is no political history. In the past, I used the definite article when talking about the history of Yemen, but now I make it indefinite and I say history of Yemen, bearing in mind that there are different histories. So I apologize. I didn't want to neglect the history of the south of Yemen, but what I intended to do is attempt to have a telescopic and panoramic view toward what is going on in Yemen. Unfortunately, we have some microscopic approach, and this kind of thinking hides a lot of realities, and what I try to do is to have and to give some panoramic mountainous view to all of you. I know that when you talked about the southern Arab part, and its needs lecture by itself. What you mentioned about cat, I don't think that one individual in Yemen will by default be involved in violence, because the connotation of cat has nothing to do with violence. Maybe the economic role. There are several studies which emphasize the impact of cat on the economy of Yemen, and the irrigation which goes wrong in irrigating the cat instead of other agricultural products, and in addition to health side effect of cat. If I were in the shoes of a Yemeni who is jobless, who doesn't have sports facilities, can you imagine that the number of sports centers in Yemen is 321 sports centers in all the countries, and these sports centers are very small and they are opened only prior to election campaigns. If I put myself in the place of these people and where I can't find a job, I can't find facilities where to exercise my hobbies, and I don't defend the cat, but I'm just trying to justify why people resort only to the cat. If we give importance to this youth and we establish sports centers, I'm sure that the consumption of cat will decrease. The consumption of cat is just a kind of replacement and compensation among the youth. Provision of sports facilities, of work, etc. Of course, it's out of question that it has a lot of inconveniences. Of course, some people say that when you import cat from Ethiopia, you will kill the economy which is based on cat trade. In the times of wars, we can see that among the management at 12 noon, there is some norm that is followed, and there is an efficiency commitment at this time at noon.
The problem is the sub-national identification and the non-national loyalties due to the failure of the state institutions in responding to the requirements of the state. But once again, I say that I do not want to find excuses, but I try to understand why should I be loyal to an institution that is not concerned with my problems. If there is a state institution which is not responding to my problems, and if the tribe is responding to my needs, I will feel belonging to the tribe. The failure of the state institutions is in the core of the problem of Yemen. I agree with you, definitely. Have I answered your questions? I think you posed the question. Microphone, please use a microphone. I cannot hear the speaker. I'm sorry, I cannot hear the speaker. One of the Italian philosophers in the 18th centuries celebrated the founding of Italy. The largest project was to make the citizen who belongs to the place, and that is the project in which the governments have failed due to many reasons we try to explain. One of the keys to solve the problem is to retrieve and recover that loyalty to the nation. And I felt that recently, and now people are feeling that there is the feeling and the concern for one Yemen. And would Yemen be better if it has not been Republican Yemen? I don't know whether I have the answer for this question. I cannot imagine yesterday to be today. Yemen was a model. Who could have been possible that the GCC could have discussed integrating Yemen into the council. According to my information, the GCC is trying hard to play a role in preventing the fall of Yemen. And UAE, I am not hailing UAE because it is hosting me. This country is trying to help Yemen in developing Yemen, and there is the conference, the Friends of Yemen, being held in London, and the GCC is one of the donors of this conference. First of all, we should develop Yemen and then think of integrating it into GCC. Some of my colleagues stated that in spite of the Yemen being one of the most armed countries, but we noticed that the tribes now used to leave their arms outside the cities and come to take part into demonstrations. But it appeared that the Yemenis are fully aware of the problem of arms, and I will speak about the democratic era in Yemen.
Nation building and state building. I think I agree fully that what happened is that we imitate the 1648 Westphalian system, parachuting it in a society like Yemen and expecting it to work. I agree fully that it is highly the time that we look for a model which is responsive to particularities of the entity. But what other options are available if we look now? The international system does not recognize you unless you are a nation state registered with a flag and anthem. I'm sure you know that the Westphalian system is the best product that has been exported in the modern history of the world. It has been duplicated everywhere, but we need to think about finding an indigenous system which is responsive to the particular. United Arab Emirates provides an excellent example. It created its own mode of governance, which is in line with its culture, with its history, with its heritage. I mean, this is the only federal system we have in the region, and it's a very successful federal system, simply because it utilized the local potentials, local history, and local culture. And I think I need to bring it to an end here, and I'm open after this session to speak with as much as I can. Thank you so much for your attention. أشكركم جميعا.
We are very thankful for Dr. Khaled Fattah for his lecture and ideas and valuable presentation on the violence in Yemen. And I would like to thank you all for coming and for attending, and wish to meet you again in another lecture on the opportunities and challenges up to 2045, and it will be presented by Simon Cool, the assistant of the future scenarios in the Ministry of the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense on the 6th of May 2014, and I am glad to invite you for dinner in the ECSSR. Thank you for your